Hey everybody, I am super excited to finally announce that the Procedural City Generator 1.1 update is finally submitted to Epic Games. So hopefully in just a couple of days, Epic approves and all of you can get the update through your launcher. This has been the biggest update for PCG yet, and I am super excited to finally get it out there and see what you guys can do with it. So as I have mentioned before, I'm gonna mention here again, I do plan to increase the price when the update comes out. So think about this as a kind of a heads up. If you've been on the fence and you've been kind of wanting to get to wait for the support for landscape, it's basically here. It just needs to be approved by Epic, and you can get it within a matter of days. So I do plan to increase the price. I may do it as soon as the update is out, or maybe just give you guys maybe one or two extra days. But just this is kind of a heads up. So finally, I wanted to kind of show you guys what's coming up next, right? I do have huge plans for PCG. I'm definitely not done. So I generally don't show this, but I do have a roadmap, a Trello board, and this is just private for me to try to keep track of all of the things that I've been adding, not just for PCG, I have it for my other assets as well. But just wanted to kind of show you guys what it's all in this update and maybe what's coming next. So you can see here that I have one board or one column here for the 1.1 update, everything that is done. And you can see things like I've added a park UI. If you ever buy the procedural park asset, it comes with a UI that you can integrate with PCG very easily, and I even have a little tutorial on how to do that. Landscape options to the UI, obviously everything should go through the UI to make it a lot more convenient. Road spawning based on zones, added a bridge options for the roads and the mesh. You guys have seen that in previous devlogs. Basically, when the roads go through a water actor, I want the roads to automatically generate a bridge. And even though my meshes aren't the best, you can obviously change it for your own custom meshes, or if you buy another asset from the marketplace, it should be very, very easy for you to make your bridges look good. I added a road naming system that's also new for this update, and this was actually a suggestion from somebody on Discord. So I have a massive data table, and every road as it is spawned grabs a random name from the list, and all of the roads now have names. And they're divided by road type, right? So highways have their own group of names, main roads, minor roads, etc. For the zones, I've added a bunch of new improvements to the zones, including landscape options for the roads, including what kind of slopes each road can spawn on. There's also improvements to the buildings as far as the height spawn options for each building next to the roads. I ended up adding building addresses, so every single building in PCG now has a unique address, which obviously combines the name of the road and then which number the building is on that road. I've added a line landscape to the road connectors and the cul-de-sacs. I fixed some issues with the roll, with the roads, how to create intersections, which you guys have seen. I added the same options for the cul-de-sac to flatten the terrain and added some options there for the UI. This was suggested on Discord. I added a global toggle for interior spawns to the UI. So if you wanted to spawn your city without interiors first, you can. And then there's a way for you to then go back and retroactively spawn all the interior blueprints after the fact. I made improvements to the Foliage Spawner as well. I added slope detection. So if you want, your foliage to spawn, only on flat terrain instead of all, very slopey, hilly terrain, then you can do that. I added driveways to the buildings. Again, this is another suggestion from Discord, which wasn't that hard to add, but I think it adds a lot. So now you'll see all the homes in the residential and rural zones have very nice driveways connecting to the road. I added similar settings for the cul-de-sac buildings. Now they match the height of the cul-de-sac so it doesn't look weird. I added different options for the buildings to flatten the terrain and another one to apply textures. So again, if you wanted to generate your city first without modifying your landscape, you can see it where the buildings will spawn, and then once you're happy, then you can then apply the alignment, the carbon of the terrain after the fact. So again, a lot more flexibility. I added a much better procedural material to the landscape. The one it came up with at first was just a very simple height-based procedural material, but now that I'm doing a lot more with landscapes, I wanted to come up with something better out of the box. So I added layers for sand and dirt and even asphalt. So now you guys have a much better material, which of course you can replace with something way better from the marketplace. I added detection of physical materials to prevent road spawning. So now because we have landscape and you can have different layers on the landscape with physical materials, now you also have the option of specifying which physical materials the roads should avoid. So if you don't want any roads, for example, on sand, right? It's a common example I use. If you have like a little beach area, you probably don't want like a main road going straight through the sand, right? So you can just add the sand physical material and then the roads will not spawn there. I added the same physical material detection for the foliage spawner. Same thing, not only do you have slope, but you have the physical material. And again, with that same theme, I added it to the buildings. So again, you may want roads to spawn a specific physical material or layer, but not buildings. Maybe you want like a farmland type thing, right? Or maybe you want a stretch in your city, which is just roads, but no buildings, right? So you have that option. I also added slope-based spawning for buildings. You don't want your buildings to spawn on something that's super steep, right? Again, more options for you to tweak. I made improvements to manual roads. So before you could span your manual roads directly through the manual mode button, but now they're automatically added to the city, so less manual work. And now there's a new button here, and I showed this, I think, on my last devlog, where you can just drag and drop all your roads from the content browser. It's a lot easier to map out a custom configuration for your roads. Then you just select all of your roads, click one button on the UI, and they're automatically added to your city, which means that buildings will spawn and everything. So it just gives you a much easier and quicker way of creating procedural roads and then making sure that you add your own little touches with your own manual roads, tie it all together really quickly, and then spawn your buildings as expected. Prop support for landscapes, again, just aligning the landscapes, making sure that the landscapes are always straight and spawning correctly. This is fairly new also. I added a road settings per zone. These are generation options. So you can have roads that are very curvy or grid-like or organic. So those used to be global settings for your entire city, and I've added those settings per zone, which I think makes a huge difference. That means that you can have very straight roads on a commercial zone, usually like the city center, for example, would be very straight roads, kind of a grid-like scenario. But then maybe when you go to like a rural zone, they're way more curvy, right? They're or maybe even organic in some sense. So now within the same city, the same road passing through different zones will change its generation setup, which is really, really nice. There were a couple of bugs that were fixed, like this one. Now that there's a lot more emphasis on roads being more curvy, there is a possibility for the roads to self-overlap. And I added a way to detect self-overlap and correct that. These are epics. Usually if you've done any software developments, you create user stories, and really, really big user stories are usually called epics. So the two big epics for this release were obviously landscape support and support for bodies of water. Obviously, those are the two really big things. So these stories right here, these two cards, represent a huge amount of work and improvements on all of the internals to make sure that that works, right? So that's not one single feature, that's like basically the entire thing. And then I fixed a couple more bugs, like in this case, sometimes the roads would connect and not detect that there was another road there, so you'd have like this overlap. That has been fixed. This is an improvement that I made recently as well, where sometimes the road would connect to the very end of another road. So now I do a check for that and then extend this road to match and create a very nice smooth corner. This was something that bothered me for a while, when sometimes when we were creating intersections, you would get like this overlapping points and it would just kind of fold the mesh. I made big improvements. I wouldn't say that it's 100% fixed because there's so much variability, but I would say that it's mostly fixed. And again, the point is trying to reduce the amount of manual adjustments you guys will have to do. Yeah, obviously added water support and slope support for highways. Highways have always been a bit of a special case. They're not supposed to be like regular roads. They're meant to connect different cities from road connector to road connector. So I always leave that to the end. It's some kind of a special case. And finally, this is something that I literally added just a couple of days ago. And it had to do with better collision detection when loading around the player. Because, I'm using by default disabling collision when you're all the way in the city and only having collision around the player. That is for performance purposes. Sometimes if the player spawns right in the middle of the city, it would not trigger the overlaps correctly, and that's just something that is just the way Unreal works. And I had a couple of workarounds, but I wasn't really too happy with it. So I thought about something, and I think I created something that is a lot more stable and easier to use. So thank you. You know who you are. Somebody in Discord suggested and pointed this out, and I said, hey, if I'm gonna include something, this is kind of the time to do it before I push this out the door, because the next update is always going to be in UE5. So that is pretty much it, right? And again, this doesn't cover everything. These are just kind of the major beats. Trust me, there is a lot that went into getting things to work. But compare the 1.1 to the previous two updates, like 1.01, this is what I added. So a very simple update. 1.02, I added a few more things. Obviously, 1.0 obviously is the biggest one because, that's the initial release. But 1.1 has been really, really big. If I move up here, you can see that the plan now is to move 1.1 to UE5, right? So as soon as Unreal Engine 5 comes out this year, obviously I'll be working on converting PCG to UE5, which mostly means all of the physics stuff is now obsolete, right? So Chaos is the new physics engine, the default engine, and PhysX is not available the same. And I do have physics vehicles and a bunch of other blueprints that use physics. So I'm going to have to be updating all of that to use Chaos. That includes adding an option for Chaos Destruction. Right now, I do have Destruction via Apex, which again will be deprecated for UE5. So basically, I have to just make the changes. I'm still debating whether or not I want to make the buildings nanite. If you do, then obviously the LODs are going to be way smoother, way better. The only reason I would not do it is because maybe some people have lower end systems and they don't want to use nanite. So I'm kind of in the fence there. I'll probably think about it a little bit more, but ideally I would. And finally, I want to investigate. I already started doing this, but I want to investigate how to do city spawning that matches the world partition grid. So if you guys haven't heard, UE5 comes with an automatic loading and unloading system called world partition. Way better than level streaming and world composition. It does everything automatically. It divides the world into grids, and all of the actors on those grids are going to be loaded and unloaded automatically. There is zero setup here. So a lot of the things that I've done before, like the city sections, if you guys have seen my video on city sections for megacities, all that stuff was basically done to work around the limitations of UE4. That hopefully goes away. I'm not going to remove it, but it won't be necessary anymore when you can just spawn your city and use world partition, and it'll just take care of loading and unloading your assets. So I'm looking into a way to kind of match the grid and spawn buildings and roads within the grid to make it really easy to load and unload sections of the city. but that's not going to be probably for this update. That is going to be an investigation. Otherwise, this update will take a little bit longer, and I want to get this out to you guys ASAP. And finally, let's take a look at 1.2, which should be another big update. A lot of this is, I just want to make sure that I say that this is not a promise. I'm not promising this is coming. This is just what I think I'm going to be working on for 1.2. Okay. And the biggest one here is multiplayer support for all of the blueprint code. Now, PCG itself, the generation, all of that is done in the editor. So you're thinking, okay, well, what do you mean multiplayer support, right? So you can use PCG in a multiplayer game right now. All of the generation stuff, all of the heavy lifting is done in the editor, so it doesn't really matter. But there are some blueprints that are not replicated, like, for example, the interior blueprint, when you're spawning and despawning interiors, or when you're going nearby a vehicle, right, which is a static mesh, and then I replicate and I switch it with a skeletal mesh so you can drive around. My vehicle blueprints, like the airplanes and the cars and things like that, are not replicated. They shouldn't be too hard, but I still need to make sure that it works as expected. So a couple of people have been asking about this, and I've had this in the back of my mind. So I am planning to do this for 1.2. That is the plan. And also I'm going to be taking a closer look at Sidewalks, another big feature that has been submitted and asked for a lot. I actually plan to do this for 1.1. But it just kind of didn't make the cut. So this is already kind of halfway done. And then you can see that there's a bunch of different things here, like support for the procedural building generator. This is one of the assets. I'll actually click here real quick. From Master High Poly. This is a really cool asset, and it is free. So I love to add a way to support it better for PCG, and there's a bunch of things that are going to be supported here. So things like OSM data to create roads, maybe even look into creating a simple traffic system or road decals using RVT. So those are the things that I'm going to be investigating, not necessarily adding to 1.2. Again, this is pretty far off, so this is just, again, my general idea of what I want. So we'll see. So anyway, that is all I wanted to share with you guys. Thank you guys for being so patient. Hope you're excited about the update, and let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for any of the future updates as well. I do take these things very seriously, so go ahead and make your suggestions in the comments below or on Discord, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.